So, for those of you who were with us before, we will follow exactly the same format. So 10 minutes for the speaker, 10 minutes for the reviewer, plus 1 or 2 burning questions. My name is Laurent Beslay. I'm working for the European Commission, the Joint Research Center, and we are conducting research. We are supporting our Brussels colleagues who are developing policy. We are providing them some scientific and technological supports. Part of our mandate is to promote research, and in the frame of Cpdp, we are supporting 6 of the students who are intervening in the course of this afternoon. This session is supposed to be a bit more technology-oriented, although strongly linked with the privacy and data protection framework. We will have a bit more diversity than expected at the beginning, with a more legally oriented presentation at the end. And I'm sure you will appreciate this diversity. We will immediately start with Michael Beggs, who have been selected, who won the INRIA prize. And so the reviewer will give more detail about this prize right after his presentation. The floor is yours. You have 10 minutes.
Sounds good. Thanks so much. So good afternoon, everyone. Before I get started, I should say I was asked to keep this at an understandable level and not delve into all the math that we needed in the paper to get these things working. So what I will do in the next couple of minutes, I'll give you the motivation, the scenarios that we wanted to solve. I'll more or less tell you what you can solve using our approach. I'll just have one slide on how this actually works, abstracting away from all the details. And mostly I'll concentrate on what good things can be done now that couldn't be done earlier. Yeah. So let me start with a general motivation. So this is about collecting personal information and convincing other parties that this information is correct in some form. So the motivation I picked for the talk, also one of the motivations we had in the paper, for example, if you look at electronic health, so health insurance companies are more and more collecting personal information, and if you are, let's say, particularly healthy, you get better rates. Yeah. If you think about this in slight more detail, so what does this actually mean? So I'll abstract from this in one way. So let's assume you have a patient here and assume that you have, for example, a mobile wristwatch which collects your health information. Yeah? So on the right-hand side, you have, let's say, an insurance company that wants to understand how your health is actually at this moment, what you did, and so on. Now, if you think about this, so this agent V, the health insurance company, is typically interested in aggregations of your data. It's not interested in understanding what exactly you did at every point in time, but they want to know how well you do on average, how active you are on average, things like this. Yeah. If you think about this, the typical scenario is that you would compute these aggregations yourself. So for example, you have your daily pulse or whatever you have, you compute the average and you send it over. And if this is good, then you get a good rate. If this is not so good, well, let's see what will happen. However, if you think about this, there are major concerns, both privacy and security. I think the privacy concerns are pretty clear at hand. You don't want to give away too detailed information. So the insurance company shouldn't know what exactly you did at every point in time. However, there is also a dual requirement. Of course, the insurance company wants to know that you cannot cheat, right? Because if you simply take this information and if it's bad, you just manipulate it, that it looks better, and then you send it over. Yeah, so you get good rates, but it destroys the usefulness of the system completely. If you think about this just intuitively without being experts, that's a really hard problem because the patient does not want to give the actual data away, but the other side wants to be sure that the computation is correct. So intuitively, it looks unsolvable, right? I mean, how should the right-hand side know that you did it correctly without knowing what you actually operated on? And the surprising thing is there is this magic of crypto. So in crypto, we have some magic primitives. Some of these things are known like signatures. Some of these things are less known like zero knowledge proofs. So proving that something holds without giving too much information away. Let me just say you can do miracles with these things if you do it right. But let me first tell you what we look at in general, and then I hope you get an intuition what you can solve given the protocol, the construction that we came up with. In general, we have three parties, so-called three-party application model. On the left-hand side, you have what we call a trusted source. So something that generates this information that you reason about, like your health information. That's your wristwatch. Yeah. The only thing that's important is this thing must not be tampered with. Yeah. You can assume that's trusted hardware or something like this. In the middle, you have the data owner, the person that owns the actual data. In our example, the patient. Yeah. This guy wants privacy. Yeah. You don't want to give too much information away. And on the right-hand side, you have, let's call the service provider. This guy wants correctness. Yeah. It doesn't want to know everything, but it wants to know that whatever was computed is correct. So if this guy computed, I am actually healthy according to some criteria, then this computation is correct. So, the idea is that, just intuitively, if you think about this, wouldn't it be good if the data owner could simply prove that you did it right? So you compute your stuff on your actual data. You don't give it away, but you have something small like a proof, whatever this is, which convinces the other party that you couldn't cheat, but you don't give anything away except for that you didn't cheat. Yeah. I can't go deeper. If you want to go deeper, that's crypto, that's actually non-interactive zero-knowledge arguments of knowledge and so on, stuff like this. It's just important to say that miraculously, you only leak what you leak by computing the aggregate. And the other person knows that you cannot cheat. That's the idea. If you do this, you have many instantiations. Once I touched upon health scenario, risk assessment, right? Collect interesting information, for example, using biosensors. The data owner is the customer. It wants to keep this measurement private, but it wants to send aggregated measurements to the health insurance company. And the health insurance company doesn't trust the customers, so it wants to know that the computations are correct. That's actually pretty much what's currently being done in practice, with the exception that you typically don't have privacy. You simply send out everything you have, and the computation is done at the service provider side. This is not ideal. If you want to have privacy, why not do it locally? Decide yourself what you give away, but then you have to be sure that the service provider cannot be cheated. Second example, smart metering, if you notice. So the energy consumption in your household is very accurately measured at any point in time. And the energy company wants to know how much and to which extent and which intervals you consumed energy. This allows for better planning and so on. Well, green energy and so on. Again, at the moment, you send everything to the energy provider and they do the computation, which is somewhat strange because it means the energy provider can see exactly which devices you used at which point in time, even up to the exact TV channel they were watching. Yeah. Of course, the idea was do it locally, give it over, the aggregate, and prove that this was right. Yeah. And there are many more examples. So the general thing is you have personal information that is correct for some reason, that you have a sensor that makes it correct. You want to process it, keep secret what you consider private, and send it over to the other party and convince this party that it's correct. And if you accept this, that's what we solved in a general manner. So this was not only health and smart metering. There are so many more examples. For example, pay as you drive, health statistics, right? Loyalty cards and so on. So everything that behaves where you want to convince another party that you did something right falls under this general umbrella. Yeah. I should say up front, we were not the first to look at this. Many people at the best venue looked at this. The problem is if you think deeply, you want to have three properties, and these are difficult to get simultaneously. You want to have privacy. That's this first miraculously looking bullet. Work on secret data. Second, arbitrary computations. Not just the average, but you want to do arbitrary stuff, send it over, and then proof. Yeah? No limits on what you can do. And third, better let it scale. Yeah? So some people had solutions that worked for 2 people. Great. I would say in reality, we have to go up to millions, potentially billions. Yeah? If you want to combine these things, then you're getting stuck. And I think that's why we got the award, because we were first to combine this. In general, let's just say that's deep crypto. However, if you want to get something away, that's called a zero-knowledge argument of knowledge. So I can convince you that something is true without telling you anything beyond that it's true. A good example is if I want to convince you that I'm older than 18 years. Yeah? So if this proof would only convince you that I'm older than 18 years, it would not tell you how old I am, except that you know that I'm older than 18. Yeah? So if you want, that's like a trusted attorney. Yeah? So I tell this age to the attorney, And you can ask the attorney, is this guy older than 18? And he looks at it and says, yes. So you learn nothing at all. Miraculously, this works algorithmically without a separate attorney. Let me just conclude by saying, so if you look at these bars, maybe you cannot see it from the back. This light blue is the efficiency of our solution. The other solutions were without privacy. So the punchline is, if you do it right, and if you go deep in the math, you get all these properties, very strong privacy, and actually you are as fast as the fastest solution before without privacy, in some cases even faster. Yeah? So this is actually all I wanted to say on this abstract level. Three-party model, you get information from somewhere, be it biosensors, be it smart metering, anything that produces information that you consider sensitive. You are the guy in the middle. You want to decide yourself what you give away, what you compute on it and what you give away and so on. But you also want to convince the guy on the right that what you did is correct, because this is crucial for most business models that we actually have, because if you can cheat, what's the point in the first place? Yeah. So we designed a protocol for this. This is as efficient as anything that existed before without privacy. And if you think about this, maybe you find more solutions where you can use that. It's actually a pretty miraculous primitive that I convince you that I did something right on my machine without actually telling you on which data I did it on. Yeah. So that was all I wanted to say. I'm done. I'm in a time.
Thank you very much.
Sure. You're welcome.
So now I will ask Daniel to join us.
Thanks very much, Michael. So I'm Daniel Metayer. I'm a research director at INRIA, which is a national research institute for computer science in France. So I'm very happy to be here today because I was the chairman of the INRIA CNIL Privacy Award Committee this year. So I was not a reviewer of this paper, as was said before. And this is not just an INRIA award, it's a CNIL INRIA award. It's the first edition of this award. And so INRIA, of course, we have as a first mission scientific excellence, but we are also committed to ensure that computer science serves society and promotes individual rights. That's the reason why we have started a collaboration with the CNIL several years ago. It's now a long-term collaboration. We have joint project with the CNIL. We have also joint reflections about the future of privacy, and also actions to increase awareness. And talking about awareness, we hope that this new CNIL INRIA Privacy Award will help promoting research on privacy and data protection in computer science. And so coming back to this paper, I believe that this paper that Michael summarized briefly and I think very clearly is a perfect example of research combining scientific excellence and practical applications to improve privacy protection. Also, it's the goal that Michael described, this initial motivation to achieve at the same time integrity and privacy is one of the major goals in this area. And so providing practical tools to meet this goal, I think, is a major achievement. So for all that, I would like to congratulate again Michael and his co-authors for their work. I think it's really a very major achievement. So now let me come back to the paper, some questions to start the discussion about it. One of the things that I like very much in your work is genericity or generality, as you have shown on one of the slides, in many different ways, because of course you can take into account, you can consider arbitrary computations, you can deal with what's called secret verifications and also public verifications. Maybe you can just say a bit more about this because you didn't have time to talk about it. So you have many sources of generality, many reasons why this can be a very general framework. At the same time, to deal with these kind of problems, we know that there are already a number of solutions which have been published, proposed, for example, for smart metering. There's a lot of papers about that. So one question that we may have, and that we have regularly in this kind of context, because as you know, now we are in the situation where we have to apply the GDPR, the new regulation. This new regulation has a provision to enforce, to make privacy by design an obligation for data controllers. And so we are facing now a big problem, technically speaking. We know that we have to implement privacy by design. We know that we have many solutions for the same problem, such as smart metering, depending maybe on the goals that you want to achieve, the conditions, the computing powers, relationship between the different actors, what you want to protect or not. You have a lot of solutions. And one big problem facing designers, developers, is how should I choose? How can I find my way through all these options and possibilities? So my first question is, among the solutions that have been proposed in the past, for example, for smart metering, are there many of these solutions which can be seen actually as specific cases, maybe of your general framework, but maybe some of them, maybe not all, definitely not all of them. So how should I proceed as a designer? Do you envision some kind of environment based maybe on ArtSnark to design new product, to help a designer to build a solution?
Sure. I mean, well, the more concrete the problem setting gets, the easier it is to tailor the solution to it. Yeah, so that's what many papers before that did actually, also for smart metering, because there you had very specific, well, extra information that you could take into account. Yeah, some of these solutions for smart metering will constitute indeed special cases of the ArtSnark construction. This is why I, in the presentation, tried to abstract it to this three-party model, because to some extent, actually, smart metering is a three-party model, right? I mean, something generates the information, the user sees it, and the, well, energy provider consumes it, right? Having that said, you often get slightly more efficient solutions if you do something for a very specific, concrete setting. It has always been the case since the dawn of information security. However, we came close. I mean, especially to the settings that I mentioned, also smart metering, I think we are on par as far as efficiency is concerned with specialized solutions. Yeah, this might not always be the case, especially if, for example, if the right-hand side has extra requirements, which sometimes could emerge, then I cannot tell you that for sure. Yeah, but I would say in general, I think all these things to us served as motivations, as they gave us insights, we benefited from them, to later on see, let's say, the common core. Yeah, and the common core is this ArtSnark thing, because, I mean, in a nutshell, everything boils down to signed data, computations on it, and proving in one way or the other. And in all existing construction, this was not clearly separated, but they mingled it together in one protocol. Yeah. So I think the short answer is, I would take the general solution whenever it fits your needs and efficiency. If you need something even better for a very specific use case, you have to dig deeper if you can do further improvements.
Thanks, Michael. I have many other questions, but I would like to keep some time if there are any questions from the audience for some interaction. Is there any question? Otherwise, I can continue. Yes?
What would be a potential other solution for the problem? I mean, a completely different solution instead of proving that you tell the truth?
Well, I mean, here you have a very strong notion of privacy. You want to say that you learn nothing at all except for the result of the computation. Other solutions made this weaker. They said you don't learn much, which is way different from you learn nothing at all. Then you can, for example, do statistical perturbation. So you can add noise to the things. And this is a different solution. So these are settings where correctness doesn't matter, where you can say, I'm willing to tolerate a certain amount of noise, but this has other problems because this composes, because if I give you nothing at all and again nothing at all, it stays nothing at all, right? Whereas for this noise, this is harder. If I'm noising it, but then I'm giving out one thing and another and a third and a fourth time, then this noise cancels out. So there's this privacy budget thing. So it gets smaller. So it's getting unwieldy because you never really know how private you are. Yeah, but that's an orthogonal solution, which in some cases might be better. I would say in most cases it's worse. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Can I ask you, what came to mind is that this protocol, is it as useful for the service provider as it is for the individual? So I understand why, from my perspective, it would be very useful because I give nothing away. But then the fact that the service provider gets nothing is not useful for them.
Well, it depends on what you should compute. I mean, I would say it's mutually beneficial because the service provider will set the requirements on what should be computed. For example, if you are the health insurance company, you would say, I need exactly the following information. This is what you can specify. And then the user can decide to opt in or not. Yeah? But you will learn exactly what you required, but nothing beyond this. This was my example when you say age bigger than 18. If that's what you're interested in, I will give you exactly this one bit of information. If you want to know more, request it. Yeah?
But for example, I'll tell you that I'm over 18, but you won't know my birthday.
You won't know this at all. This you can do. I mean, the idea here is really that the service provider can specify exactly what should be computed, but it has to be open and transparent about it. Yeah? And you compute this locally. And you will learn exactly that. So the user can see what should be computed and then opt in or opt out, depending on whether this is acceptable. And you get exactly what you requested, but not more. For example, if you want to know more, again, my example, age bigger than 18, if I sent you my birthday, you also learned if I'm bigger than 18, but you learned a lot more. And this gives away exactly, well, provably, what you wanted to learn, and you have a proof that I cannot change this, which, by the way, is different to the statistical noising, because there you have no idea. Maybe I added far too much noise. You have no clue if this was correct. Yeah. Here you have a guarantee that it is correct. Sure.
Do you want to ask a last question?
Well, a little comments I cannot resist. Very interesting concepts. You mentioned the fact that the data owner will compute and will deliver the results of the computing. Does it mean that he will need more computing resources? Where do you place the barrel here?
Actually, surprisingly, I didn't have time to think about this. This originated, so this general concept is also called verifiable computation, outsourced computation. So the original motivation is to keep the computational overhead for the client to the absolute minimum. This is scalability. So this, for example, works perfectly well also for cloud computing, because we can show that you only have to keep a very, very small amount of local storage and computational power, and you can outsource the remaining stuff to more powerful services. And fortunately, surprisingly, this blends in really well with the properties. So I think the computational aspect for the actual data owners, for the middle part, is kept to a minimum. This is because it's verifiable computation. Outsource, but verify.
Okay. Michael, thank you very much. Daniel, would you like to add something or conclusion? Yeah, Daniel, thank you also very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are going to move now to the next speaker. Carolin, can you please? I will help you with the computer.
Yes.
Yeah.
But there it's not. Well, let's see. But it's not visible here.
Oh man, there it is.
Not a problem. Your device. The floor is yours, Carolin, please.
All right.
Go immediately.
Right, so first of all, thank you very much to the organizers for giving me the chance to present here. My name is Carolin Moeller, and I'm a PhD candidate at Queen Mary University of London, and today I'm going to talk about Industry 4 and the related data protection and data security challenges. I'm going to structure this presentation around 4 main things. So first of all, what is Industry 4? Then examples of the data protection challenges, data protection security challenges, and then I will draw some general conclusions on what the future of this topic might be. So what is Industry 4? So basically it wasn't easy to really find an adequate definition for it because it's quite broad and really specific at the same time. But one could regard it as a manufacturing-related subset of IoT. And more specifically, one could argue that it refers to the rearrangement of industrial production processes where single devices, machines, and the products themselves are increasingly interconnected by the internet and autonomously communicate with each other along the production chain. Now, this is a quite broad concept, but in more simple terms, one could see a smart factory, or basically an Industry 4 environment, as a social network, whereas the nodes are machines and they independently interact with each other and also steer each other autonomously. The reasons why it's called Industry 4.0 is basically it actually derives from Germany, and it's perceived to be the fourth industrial revolution. So in this graph you can see that it's following the first 3 waves of industrialization, which is first the invention of steam power, then the electricity and the mass production that resulted from that, and then the ICT. Right. So what are the data protection challenges? In my paper I present some more, but I focus here only on 2. And before going into the examples, it's maybe worth pointing out that the Industry 4 is perceived to change business models, and that's also the reason why suddenly manufacturers are actually perceived to hold a lot of personal data, because basically service providers are not necessary anymore to provide services to the consumer, because through the internet they can directly interact actually with the producer and in this way make things more efficient, but that obviously means that data is suddenly in an industrial environment. So the first example is the smart car example, and I would like to mention something that happened in Germany last year. There is a car sharing platform which is called Drive Now. And basically one user of this platform was suspected of having killed a cyclist with this car. And this platform uses BMW cars for providing their services. And in the court proceedings, it's interesting to note that BMW at the end hold a really precise profile of this user with not only data about his mobile device, about his payment cards, but also location data of his mobile temperature and also location data. So the reason why actually BMW was holding this data is because of a car module inside this car, which sent the data back to the manufacturer. The second example is the connected product example, and this basically refers to incidents where a product that is actually composed of various different components contains data processing components, because that was making the production of this product more efficient. So, for example, geolocation trackers were integrated in parts of the product, and in this way, this product could be actually tracked throughout its production process. And then ultimately, if that is not disabled, it obviously can also track data of the owner of this product at the end. So obviously, this creates several different data protection challenges. And there are certain principles that are put under pressure. For example, how can people actually consent to data? For example, in the smart car example, the company wasn't even aware that this data is collected, so obviously consent cannot really be informed or cannot even be asked for. Then also the purpose limitation principle is difficult to comply with, because machines do some autonomous decisions that maybe then cannot really be known in advance. And then also, as we again saw with the smart car example, data minimization principle might also be not complied with. Moving on to the data security challenges. There are actually, one needs to also see that with data security, not only personal but also non-personal data is quite relevant in an Industry 4 environment, particularly because they give a precise view on trade secrets, and as such a company has an interest that they are not distributed widely. And also there are other reasons why data security is really relevant in an Industry 4 context. First of all, because of the operability, because if machines are heavily dependent on each other, for example, an infection with malware of one machine could have an effect on all the other machines, and then impact on the operability and the production availability of the company. Then, as I just mentioned, there is an interest in keeping trade secrets protected. Then there is also the aspect of environmental hazard. For example, a lot of nuclear power plants are operating in an Industry 4 environment. And then there are also health and safety consideration of employees. For example, again in Germany, there was reported an attack on a steel company, which led to basically a burning of one part of the building. And in Volkswagen, there was a situation where an employee was killed by a robot. But there, at the same time, there are some core vulnerabilities of Industry 4 in relation to data security. So there's an incremental transition. So some machines are retroactively connected to the internet, and as such, they provide a weak link. Then there are external links. For example, suppliers or cloud service providers are connected to the companies, and if they don't have adequate measures in place, that could create problems. And then there's also non-awareness. As I mentioned before, manufacturers were not necessarily always dealing a lot with data up to now, before this transition started. So particularly maybe small companies might not be really aware what security implications exist. Both the GDPR and the current directive, they have some provisions on data security. So it's stipulated that organizational and technical measures have to be taken in order to protect data. The GDPR is providing even more guidance. For example, it's providing some ideas of what could be adequate measures, for example, pseudonymization, or also the GDPR regulates that regular monitoring of the safeguards have to take place. And also they provide companies the possibility to take certain certifications which are regarded as sufficient. But apart from the GDPR, I thought it's also interesting to think about the NIS directive, because although it's specifically not applying to industry, there are certain situations where it could actually have some relevance. For example, if one of the suppliers, for example, cloud service providers, is under the scope of this directive and increases security, that obviously has an impact, positive impact also on the company. And there might be even some Industry 4 companies that would count as an essential service provider, for example, medicine or pharmaceutical companies that interact in an Industry 4 environment. And ultimately, it's just the very first effort of dealing with data security, so it could potentially in the future become more relevant also for other sectors. Right, so just to sum up, as I explained in my examples, there are some challenges of Industry 4 in the way that how it can comply with some data protection principles, but both the GDPR and also the NIS directive have some innovative principles to address these challenges, most of all, for example, pseudonymization, but also privacy by design and privacy by default that could help companies to actually deal with this. In regard to what the future of this might be, first of all, we need to see to what extent these challenges will actually materialize, because as I have pointed out before, this whole thing is currently an incremental transition and not really fully developed yet. So we will need to see to which extent challenges will actually materialize and what implications they in fact have. And then also it's crucial that further guidance is provided to companies not only to raise awareness, but also for giving them a flavor of how they can actually comply with certain aspects of the GDPR. That's it. Thank you very much.
Carolin, thank you very much. Okay, now we move to the reviewer, Arnold Roosendaal from Tilt. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you, and thanks for the presentation. I'm from Tilt. Very nice to hear that. That's been a couple of years ago, sorry. Then it was TNO, now I'm at a privacy company, but that's a side note, okay. I very much liked the paper to read it a while ago and again to prepare this review comment. I really like it, and the reason why is because you're introduced this new concept of Industry 4.0 and highlighting and very clearly showing why it has so many difficult aspects related to data protection and privacy in it. And it combines a lot of issues, which is good to see, and you have a broad overview in the paper, broad approach. As you indicated in the presentation, you have several angles there, like data protection issues, security issues. And in the introduction, you even say we have 3 challenges mainly. 2 data protection challenges. One is between the producer and the consumer, and one is between the employer and the employee, which is a different relationship. And then the 3rd challenge, of course, relates to the security issues, which is personal data and non-personal data. So I really liked it. I liked the broad overview, and I have some, well, comments, or call it suggestions or ideas for improvement, if you like. Because there's a broad overview in the paper, there's a lot of topics, it touches upon all of them. And at some points you might have some extra aspects if you combine things, and I'll have some concrete suggestions there. I've also seen one of the other reviews, and someone was suggesting, like, okay, there are a lot of issues like Internet of Things, cloud computing is in there, monitoring profiling. You mentioned the blurring context between work and private life, which is of course an issue. And these are not all new topics for industry, but they come together there. And this is an excellent example probably to use Industry 4.0 as a testing case or an example for how to move on, because we will see these kinds of interrelationships between the several issues more and more, I think. And in relation to this, you added in your conclusions as well that much more guidance is needed on how to explain and how to interpret the legal requirements and how to apply them in practice. So we have some ideas there, and exactly because of this reason, and also that you say, well, it's not only lawmaking, it's also a need for awareness and education, I would expect, or really much like, for some more critical note on the difficulty of applying and distinguishing between the different data processing activities which are involved in Industry 4.0, because you have the different relationships between producer-consumer, employer-employee. Employee data are used for the production process and to optimize things. You use customer data as input for improvement of the processes or the products. So there's a lot of different actors involved, different relationships, different kinds of relationships, and different responsibilities, perhaps. So there's a real difficulty there to look at the legal requirements for legitimate processing. And it would be very nice to see if you could flesh this out a bit and say, like, okay, these are the different distinctions and this is how we could deal with it, which actually relates to one of the main things, and probably there is a choice you might make. The paper is very applied, which is good because you have a lot of examples in it. You mentioned the BMW example, you mentioned smart cars, the other examples, which makes it really tangible. It shows how things work out. You have the practical examples, so you can understand what the arguments are about. So this is one hand, and it's very applied. The other option would be more academic, and I think there's a choice there to make, probably between completely fleshing out some of the issues, really delve into deeply embedded in academic literature and look what the consequences would be from an academic perspective, more fundamentally, or go towards a more applied direction and give some specific guidance or some specific clues or ideas you have on how to deal with this in practice. And it's a combination now, and I think it would become more clear if you make either one or the other as a choice. Some examples there which could help. One of them is the NIS directive you were mentioning already. I think this was a very innovative approach to look at another directive, another scheme. Okay, this could benefit for security purposes in this context. And I agree. I think it's not directly applicable, but in some cases it might at least be a source of inspiration on how to deal with these issues and showing complexity. And in a far-going scenario, based on assumptions, it might even become a case that you could say, well, Industry 4.0, it's so difficult and embedded in Internet of Things context that we should call this also sort of a critical infrastructure, because if something breaks there, the entire industry process breaks down. So this is one of the questions probably to think about for the future. And then I think two small points, to make. You were talking about the purpose limitation. In the paper, I thought you were more talking about is it difficult to look like, okay, is process optimization one of these things which is allowed under the purpose binding principle, which can be the case if it's to improve things. In the presentation, you were saying, okay, but it's also about the machines who are going to make their own decisions, and you can probably not foresee them, so this is complicating things. I think one of the main issues to look at there is whose data are used and which data are used. This can be sort of a guidance to look at this. And the final thing, which might be very helpful, and you touched upon it very briefly in your presentation, is the privacy by design principle. In the GDPR, there is the principle. It has only a limited explanation therein. For instance, pseudonymization, it's in the article, but that's the only explanation given there, and it's for instance, so it's not even required per se. But if you look at several elements spread along the GDPR, which gives some idea and fill in this principle of privacy by design in a more practical way or more concrete, this might be a very helpful scheme as well to help businesses ask the right questions and make the right implementations and to guide them towards a direction to have better privacy and data protection improved there. And you shouldn't probably be complete there, but just give some guidance, some direct clues would be very beneficial. And it fits in the relatively applied paper approach, I think. So really liked it, some points, and I hope it's useful for you for further work. And probably there's some room for other questions from the audience as well. So.
I have one. Maybe the audience. Any questions? Any clarification you would like to have? No? So I have a question. Thank you. In the course of your article, several times you underline the fact that this revolution, this 4.0 revolution, is blurring the boundaries between different elements, the real world, the cyber world. I noticed some of them: private, work life, production, service, personal and non-personal data. I was wondering if, according to you, is there a need to redefine this boundary, to clarify them, or should we just live with this blurring situation? Is there a need for new boundaries between the cyber and real dimension?
Well, I think just to touch on the first thing that you mentioned there, that is there's actually a boundary with what is actually already happening and what is actually the future. I mean, I think in the paper I make this point that there is Industry 4 is basically a regulatory concept that is driven by governments to actually enhance this aspect of industry, because it was seen as a way out of the financial crisis, but also to remain competitive against other countries that are newly emerging on the market. But then on the other hand, one has to see it's a trend that is already there, and it's basically not fully developed yet. So I think one needs to actually see how that will play out in reality, and what will actually be still like just an illusion. And I think there's quite some debate, especially about the more engineering community, that is not quite sure in how far that will actually develop, and in how far, for example, one could actually really go and make like this whole computerization in companies like a reality, and in how far humans can, for example, be completely eradicated from the industrial process. And that again has other implications, for example, for employment, because a lot of people could lose their jobs in this process. So there's quite some debate out there. In regard, I think the other aspect that you mentioned, in how far, what other consequences it would have that the companies more and more a virtual and kind of non-virtual environment. I mean, in the paper I make quite some points on what implication it has on employment law and privacy in employment, which I didn't have time to touch upon now. And I think it's actually an interesting point, and it's not only concerning Industry 4, but with the there are two aspects. First of all, with Industry 4, the increasing collection of data at the workplace is actually increasing. I mean, another example that I mentioned in the paper is this smart glove that tracks every movement that a worker is doing. And then on the other hand, and that's not specific to Industry 4, people can work more and more from home, but also from other countries, and steer industrial processes from there. And that maybe requires a rethink of how privacy in the work environment is regulated, because I think in case it's already mentioned that it is a blurred boundary of the private and the work life there.
Thank you very much, Carolin, for your presentation. Arnold,
Thank you
very much for the review. So now we move to the last but not least speaker. As I said at the beginning, we will have some diversity in this more technology-oriented session. Milda, the floor is yours with a more legal approach regarding the topic. You have... Yes.
Yes, so hello, I am Milda Macenaite. I'm a PhD researcher at the University of Tilburg, TILT. And today I will talk about the GDPR and children. And especially I'm interested why the GDPR suddenly claims that children deserve specific protection. So I will look into the justification that the GDPR provides. And then I will try to extend the view into other disciplines, especially into social sciences and legal domains like consumer law, and look for what they have to offer in justifying the specific protection. And then I will say something very briefly how the GDPR is protecting children currently, and how it could be improved based on these insights from other disciplines.
Relaunch it. Try to relaunch it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there is still the other presentation. Can you try? Can you try to close the other presentation, except yours, of course, huh?
Mm-hmm.
There's a little. Yeah. Now it should work.
Okay.
Let's see.
Yeah, no, it's okay. So here is the outline I already briefly mentioned. So first, why does the GDPR is suddenly, let's say, so interested into children? I would say suddenly because especially if we look into the national data protection laws, they really don't have many provisions on children. So for example, some member states say something about parental consent. So a few of them have kind of an explicit age limit for consent. For example, 12 in Scotland, 14 in Spain, and 16 in Hungary and the Netherlands. Then Ireland has just a general provision. It says that there is a possibility for parents or many other relatives, so any like brothers and so on and so forth, to give consent for a child who is not able to appreciate the nature and effects of consent. So we see a much more broader model than the GDPR currently foresees. And then also interesting to note that some other data protection laws actually say something about specific data collection situations. So, for example, Italy has a provision on publication and dissemination of reports and images. Then Luxembourg looks into medical context, has one sentence about that. Malta says something about the data processing and consent in the school of in the context of schools. And Romania just has a general notification obligation for the data of minors. So having said this, that national data protection laws didn't pay much attention to children, and it's not surprising because the Directive 95/46 actually also didn't say anything about this and conflated adults with children as data subjects in one group. So this idea somehow developed in the EU, and I claim that there are different factors which could have influenced this. So, for example, on a broader, more general level, the EU tried already to promote, protect, and fulfill the rights of children in its different policies. So it became obvious through the treaties and then the charter and then strategic documents, for example, the agenda for the rights of the child. So the data protection area, of course, didn't remain untouched. So there was this willingness to incorporate the protection of children in different areas, including data protection. Then the Article 29 Working Party, in several of its opinions, actually also paid a little bit of attention to children and especially parental consent. And then also on a higher level, the data protection authorities and commissioners in 2008 adopted a resolution where they claimed that there is a need to protect children more online, and especially underlined that there is a need to raise awareness and to be more transparent about data collection in case of children. And then, of course, some national DPAs had some initiatives like websites and awareness-raising campaigns and guidance how to process children of data, personal data of children. And of course, obviously, no one probably can deny that the US influenced a lot the text of the GDPR in this respect. So the Commission, on the one hand, acknowledges clearly that it took inspiration from, for the age of consent from COPPA, the Children Online Data Protection Act of the US, adopted in 1998. And on the other hand, if we study the whole process and the adoption of the Commission proposal, we see that the US also clearly tried to shape or to influence the text in this respect. So, for example, there was an informal note sent by the US to the Commission in December, just before the Commission published the proposal, where it was claimed that the US is very concerned about possible diverging standards, so especially because the EU at the beginning was not sure if 13 as the age limit should be there in the GDPR, and that it could be it could create obstacles for interoperability between the EU and US. So now let's look into the justifications for specific protection. So the GDPR actually is based on one main justification, that children lack knowledge or are not aware of risks, consequences, and safeguards and their rights in relation to the processing of personal data. So this is a recital 38. And of course, this is true, and we all know that advanced data collection and tracking techniques can be hardly understood even by sophisticated users. And even if we acknowledge that children can be digital natives, which is now strongly debated and contested actually, even if we acknowledge that we can be more tech-savvy than adults, are they really capable of fully realizing the consequences? And then we know about privacy policies which are long, complex, and age inappropriate. So it's interesting to look into the current developments. For example, in the UK, just to illustrate this justification, the Ofcom in the UK published a report where they, for example, highlighted that 24% of children, so 8-11 years old, and 38% of teens, they don't understand sponsored links on Google. So we provided Google searches, and the first three were marked as ads, and children thought that these are just genuine Google search results. So they couldn't identify advertising online. Then also that half didn't know about personalized advertising, so they didn't know that people could see different adverts. And then more than half just knew that products can be endorsed by vloggers. So this illustrates very well that not only the lack of knowledge, but in general lack of understanding about different business models online and how personal data can be used. And then this development was followed by another interesting example by Children's Commissioner in the UK, always in the UK, which actually tried to work with terms and conditions of Instagram. So we and ask children what they understand from these conditions. So we concluded that these were very long, 17 pages, 5,000 words, very complex language. So they gave it to teens, and of course we didn't understand anything. They said, this is boring, do we have to read it? Can you just tone it down for us? And then afterwards we asked, what did you understand? They said nothing because of the amount and of lack of clarity. So then we asked lawyers to reformulate these conditions. And they got a very interesting text, actually very direct one. So just to cite a bit, for example, anything you put, any personal information we can keep, use and share with any other companies. They can do whatever they want. We're not responsible for that. We can keep as long as we want, as long as it's reasonable for our business. We can send you adverts, but you will not always know that these are adverts. So on and so forth. So then children were presented with simplified terms and conditions, and their reaction was just, some of them were shocked and said, yeah, we should have known this before. So this example illustrates very well the lack of awareness and difficulty to understand what's going on online with personal data. So now let's broaden the view and look into social sciences. So despite this lack of knowledge and awareness, in my paper, I show that children and especially teenagers have some particular vulnerabilities which can be easily exploited online. So, for example, they are emotionally more influenced and impulsive. They can be impulsive. Normally, for them, it's more difficult to evaluate risky situations, and they can be more easily misled. And they are more focused on the present situation and the short-term goals rather than long-term goals. So, for example, if we think about some marketing, especially marketing strategies online, they can really be built to exploit these vulnerabilities. For example, in cases of real-time bidding or geolocation targeting when you are close to a point of purchase, or dynamic creative ads, embedded advertising to mislead, and so on and so forth. And to a certain extent, consumer protection law, so the GDPR doesn't take this into account, but the Consumer Protection Law, to a certain extent, considers this. For example, Unfair Commercial Practice Directive prohibits unfair practices, meaning that practices which are contrary to professional diligence and can distort behavior of an average user. So especially in case of vulnerable users, and vulnerability due to age is one of the explicit criteria in this directive, the Consumer Protection Law actually says that certain practices which are used in case of vulnerable individuals should be evaluated from the average member of that group. And also Consumer Rights Directive says that specific needs of consumers who are vulnerable should be taken into account by the service providers. So vulnerability is kind of a dual concept in consumer protection. It's due to internal causes, for example, due to age, but also due to external causes, lack of knowledge of, for example, of the market, of complex products, and similar. So I claim that children are kind of fall under these two types. So we are vulnerable due to age, but also very often vulnerable to the complexity of products and data processing practices. So then I also say that in addition to these specific vulnerabilities, we also have special needs, especially teenagers, such as identity formation, developing agency and establishing autonomy, creating peer relations. And many social networking sites are actually based or driven by these needs. So the aim is to satisfy these needs and attract as many users as possible. So, and empirical evidence also shows that social media, for example, is for teenagers is a way to represent themselves, to self-display, create their own image, and be popular, and attract friends, and so on. And then even some empirical research even shows that it has an impact on self-esteem and psychological well-being. And then we see differences in comparison to adults, actually. So, for example, clear behavioral differences. Like teenagers are more engaged in liking, commenting, so they take this short-term kind of emotional action. They express their emotions and social interests. They use diverging and multiple platforms of communication, much more than adults, and also employ different features like updates, tags, and so on. So this could partially say that, illustrate that they are more digital natives, but on the other hand also illustrate that they have these special needs which they are satisfying. And here is an example of a recent article which comes from researchers from the US, and they claim that teens are from Mars and adults are from Venus. So we analyzed 20,000 users of Instagram, and we looked into the content which they post, interactions they have, and relations they create there. And so they noted kind of relatively clear differences among teenagers and adults. So, for example, teenagers have more tags and more selfies, and they post less location diversity in photos. They have more likes and self-comments per picture, and reply to comments more. And then in relation to content, that they are more mood and emotion and follow and like tags kind of focused, and adults post more location and nature tags. But from all this research, they were able to identify with the accuracy of 82% teenagers and adults on Instagram. And also on a more high level in my paper, I claim that children also have specific privacy needs which need to be guaranteed and accommodated. So that's why they also need a specific protection. So these are just the quotes taken from some court decisions and DPA's opinions, where they clearly underline that children are still developing as personalities, so they should not be constrained in this, and they are people in the making, and they have a right to become a full person. So this partly is a deficit theory of a child, but it's also important to take account of. So currently the GDPR has kind of a two-tier system of protections. So some provisions are generally applied to both adults and children, but are framed as more relevant for children. So for example, the right to be forgotten, the right to data portability. But the second tier is more child-specific provision. So for example, protection against marketing and profiling, not explicitly stated in the text, only in the recitals, and parental consent. So now my last slide, just to rethink. So given these insights from social sciences, especially specific vulnerabilities and needs that children and teenagers might have, or have in many cases, how should we rethink about the current protection regime that GDPR provides for children? So of course, transparency and clear information is very important, but probably not enough to avoid exploiting vulnerabilities. So I claim that I think that, for example, profiling and marketing should be forbidden in case of children, much more clearly than it is now in the text. And then one should ask, of course, how should we distinguish between adults and teens online? It can create additional problems because you need extra personal data. But if we researchers could already distinguish with 80% of accuracy, probably it is unachievable as a goal. Then probably it's also interesting to consider the inclusion of the best interest of the child as a key criteria. So, for example, in the Norwegian data protection law, it is as a general principle already. So this could, for example, kind of stop or make the manipulative and unfair techniques as unfair and against the best interest of the child. And then from the consumer law, if we think about the average data subject criteria, which could be used actually. So, for example, certain data collection practices, when they are addressed to children, should be evaluated from the average child or perspective, and even more correlations should be drawn between characteristics of specific age groups and likelihood of being vulnerable to certain practices. So the GDPR foresees the data protection impact assessments, but the question is, should these assessments be conducted specifically in relation to children and allowing to take their needs and vulnerabilities into account? And then the last point is, in order to satisfy the needs also to construct the identity, to create relations, shouldn't we reconsider the parental consent model, which is now in the GDPR, and to make it more flexible, or use sliding scale approach? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Milda. Okay, now we move to the reviewer. Gloria Gonzales Fuster from VUB. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here and to be speaking after somebody that speaks faster than I do. So maybe you will have now the impression that I'm talking very slowly. Thank you for making this easy for me. I'm also very happy to be reviewing this paper because it concerns a subject that is of great interest for me lately, the protection of children's data, the data protection for minors. So the subject itself, I think it's a personal interest for me, but I think it's also a subject that can help us all, even if you're not concerned, you don't care for children, you don't care for their privacy, but you can still use this as a sort of a case study to think about privacy and data protection in Europe and beyond. How do we conceptualize data protection? What is the way in which we think about privacy protection, and then try to think, but if that's the privacy protection that we're giving for children, what does it mean for our idea of data protection? So perhaps if you can, I think that will be my main recommendation for you, just within your work. I think you're working on this not just for this paper, but more broadly. So just encourage you to put this in the broader perspective, or how we deal with privacy and data protection. And I will actually not have real questions, but just would like to emphasize 3 points that I think are very interesting in this contribution. And I would just first say very quickly my only negative comment. Yes, so you can have it. I think that the contribution that has a question, and it doesn't really answer the question, but I wonder perhaps the question is not the question that you're concerned with. I think you're really concerned in a genuine way as to why children deserve protection, and then you ask the question, why does the GDPR say that children deserve protection? And these are different questions, because the question that is of interest is of real interest, and the reason why the GDPR suddenly, out of nowhere, almost says that children deserve specific protection. I think it's one of the greatest mysteries of we have now in European policymaking, taking into account that just when the GDPR was adopted, the European Commission immediately forgot about this whole idea. So during many years we had a single data protection regime for all data subjects. Then in the context of the GDPR, the European Commission said, you know what, children deserve special protection for many reasons that some of them you mentioned them. And then now we have the GDPR, and the European Commission is, for instance, proposing a new e-privacy directive. E-privacy directive, that is the thing about mobiles, about tablets, about all the things that babies are just playing with daily. They are born, they do this all the time. They are tracked by all these devices, by the Internet of Toys. You know that there are those Barbies and all sorts of things that are recording children. Does the e-privacy say a single word about children? No, nothing at all. Children deserve specific protection. Do they? If they do, and of course you argue that they do, then what happens now? Why is the European Commission forgetting? So I think that will be my main invitation also to revise perhaps this. What is the question? Are you really trying to see if they deserve it for real, or just what are the arguments that the European Commission is using in the context of the GDPR? Now just so the 3 issues that I think are really worth discussing is this question of the why, the reason why. This is the first one that you highlight in your chapter, and it's crucial to understand all the other questions that you raised. So we have to understand what is the justification, and in light of the justification, we will think about the measures that we think have to be adapted. So this is very, very good in your contribution, and she does see is it a problem of lack of information? Is it a problem of risky behavior? Is it a problem of a lot of data being collected? So it's very crucial that we have a clear image of what is the problem, but is so specific about children. And then we can think of the measures. And for instance, just coming back on this mystery, I don't understand really the position of the European Commission. If the reason is that the children are not informed or do not understand, of course, children did not understand also 10 years ago. It's not that they suddenly all went stupid. If the problem is that they are not informed, they were also not informed before. So what is real? What is the reason, and then we can take the measures. So the how, I think it actually could deserve many chapters. What are the mechanisms that are foreseen? How do we make sense of the specificities of the regime for children in the GDPR? And you have the courage of trying to make sense of it. I think it doesn't really always make sense. There is some contradictions. There is this emphasis on the idea that children lack information, they lack awareness. And at the same time, we try to give them more awareness. So they say children will not understand the consequences of what they're doing. So what you will do is explain them better. So you have to, data controllers have to be transparent and explain better to these children that we know probably they will not understand because they are just children. So how could they understand that? And Trump is there, and it's difficult. So this is very good. I think that we make this link, so we know why and so how. And then the final point for me that this also very interesting issue that you raise about the relation between data protection and the consumer law. And I think that's a very reasonable link that you try to make, because if we say that children are vulnerable data subjects, then we have this idea, should we think about the vulnerable consumer, and that is protected in European law. And this is how one of the paths that I think can lead us precisely to think more generally about data protection and consumer law. And I've been in the past trying to think about how does European law think of the data subject. So there's a lot of case law in European law about who is the consumer. The consumer, you mentioned this in the chapter, is supposed to be, the average consumer is supposed to be reasonable. So this is why we go to the supermarket, and there are many things that could kill us if we weren't unreasonable. But we are supposed not to eat 8 kilos of potatoes, just a few, and then we are supposed not to drink 7 liters of water, just a little bit. And there is some information, little there, but we are supposed to go and read the information if we care. So there is a special conception of the consumer in European law. And my question from a long time has been, what is the conception that we have of the data subject? Is the data subject supposed to be reasonable? Is he unreasonable? I really don't know. And I've been reading data protection law, trying to understand so the data subject is unaware, but at the same time we are keep giving them information so they could consent, not consent, make informed choices. How can the unaware data subject make informed choices? And one of the key terms in all the discussions of consumer law and sometimes data protection is this question of being the law being paternalistic. And of course, if you are paternalistic or not, you are in a way treating the individuals as children. So for me, all this is very, very related. What do we think children need, and what do we think the data subject needs to be protected when it's no longer a child? So it's not really a question, it's just an invitation for you to have questions. I hope you can have some.
Before the question, I would like to thank you very much, Gloria, for putting so much light on my institution, the European Commission. But we will continue to discuss about that later. Is there any questions or comments about? Yes, please.
So the reasons why children are more vulnerable is because they're more impulsive and they don't have the time to read through all this. They don't have the knowledge base. Yeah, I was looking at the reasons why children are more vulnerable, then saying that that's a problem in the whole population. We're all not informed enough, and we all make impulsive decisions. So where does the line begin? Where is the difference between an adult and a teenager? Teenagers are just more vulnerable to those things, but it's a problem at all levels. So why would there be specific protections for children, considering it's a problem everywhere? So should there be just the same protection but more, or should there be specific things for children, even though it's kind of the same problem, just worse?
Yes, I think that all the users experience similar problems in many respects, but I think it's also interesting to consider children as a special case, especially if we look into developmental psychology and the stages of development they indicate. So, for example, how cognitive development is advanced or develops in individuals. So this sheds some light on specificity, actually. So not all adults, of course, have the same level of cognitive and mental development, but the majority and the average consumer assumed of the European Commission in the directive, for example, would have some characteristics that children wouldn't and teenagers wouldn't. So I think there are extra arguments to consider children separately, but of course there would be cases when both adults and children would lack and be vulnerable to specific data collection practices.
Is there a last burning question? Yes, please.
Thank you for the presentation, quite interesting. I was wondering, I didn't read the paper, so probably it's in your paper, you cover this as well. Now it seems as if the main thrust is that children should somehow be not approached in a certain sense, or they should be carefully approached. But you also might think of that it should be forbidden or prohibited that data will be collected in any situation from minors. And the reason could be that why would you collect data from minors? It's because you would like to make business in this respect for minors as well, or maybe for their parents. And if you would prohibit the collection of data, then the situation would change, because then the responsibility is not longer, let's say, in the interaction of the one who presents the data towards the child, but it's far much more on the data provider itself. Is that something which is in vain? Is something which is could be a way of reasoning, or is it just a way out of the data economics?
Do you mean that it's better to have a parental consent when the responsibility falls on the parents, or?
Yeah, now it's parental consent, and then still the whole thing happens, you know. But you also may say, so it's very much on the side of, let's say, the autonomy of the subject, but because the subject has a minor age, or it's on the adult age, you might say it's simply prohibited to collect data from these data subjects.
So my claim is that it should be prohibited to collect data from children, especially in some cases where it's against the best interest, for example, in profiling and marketing. And the GDPR kind of says that in the recital, actually. So we acknowledge that these areas are more problematic, and probably because in many cases they wouldn't provide kind of benefits, or it's kind of not in line with the best interest of a child. So I would kind of support this position. But then to how viable it is for the industry, yeah, that's another question.
Okay, Milda, thank you very much for your presentation, and Gloria as well, of course, for your review. We will move immediately to the last session. Yes, let's do this logistic. It will be more focus on the risk aspect of the GDPR, and it will be co-chaired by Francesca and I. So we will start in 2 minutes.